Hey everyone, thanks for joining us here on Reluctant Preppers. Asking for your help tonight because even though we have record numbers of subscribers here on Reluctant Preppers trying to spread the word about preparedness and self-reliance and awareness, we've been receiving reduced revenue from our YouTube videos being marked as advertiser unfriendly and having to curtail the content and the descriptions and the topics and the guests that we can introduce. So with your help, we can overcome that and break free of that restriction. If you go to patreon.com/reluctantpreppers, you can make any amount of small or modest or larger monthly donation to help support our mission. We've established goals there to help bring you even more content with the different levels that we can achieve together. Thanks, folks. Check it out, patreon.com/reluctantpreppers. And now, on to our main event.
As a responsible person with growing concerns for your privacy and personal liberty, you want to know where we're headed and what you can do about it. We ask the experts what you need to do to take prudent and responsible action to safeguard your family's wealth and well-being, and what basic first steps will help you to be aware and prepared. ReluctantPreppers.com.
Welcome back, Reluctant Preppers. We're glad to have a returning guest today. Bix Weir, founder of RoadToRuta.com, is here with us on Reluctant Preppers. Bix has been a critic and a kind of a outspoken person who shakes up the picture and gets people to think about things in new ways, starting from his insights into the founding of the Federal Reserve and how it has changed people's understanding of what real money is and how we can break free of that and reclaim our independence. Bix, thanks for joining us again here on Reluctant Preppers.
Hey, Donnegan, it's nice to be here.
You have joined the evil empire, as I understand, from paying attention to your YouTube video blog. You actually are now a part of the reason that JP Morgan is still in business. And you have, after telling us about the warnings of staying away from the banksters for a decade, you've now joined the evil empire. So can you tell us why and give us the whole rundown on that?
Why I'm sleeping with the devil.
Yes.
Yeah, sure. I opened up. I mean, it's not as dramatic as I made it sound on the video or that you just made it sound. But I opened up a checking account with JP Morgan Chase. And yes, I have been their most outspoken critic, or one of them. You know, anybody who's invested in silver and has been fighting the fight is an outspoken critic of JP Morgan. But on the other end of the spectrum, you do have to be a little bit involved in the banking system to pay your rent and your power bill and your gas bill and things like that. So I have been advocating for years for people to keep as little as possible in the banks. But I understand that, you know, to live in today's society, you have to deal with the banking system. Given that, and people always ask me, well, you know, my bank's fine. It's a credit union, or my bank's fine. It doesn't have any derivatives. No. They are all interconnected in both the deals that they do and the customers that they have. So that's why they call these banks too big to fail, because if they did fail, it would destroy the entire system. So why would I put my money with the largest, most evil, corrupt, too big to fail bank in the history of the banking system? Very simply, because out of all the banks I look at, knowing I have to choose one, JP Morgan has made the most important investment that anybody could make these days, and that is an investment in physical silver to the tune of, according to Ted Butler, over 600 million ounces of physical silver in their coffers. Now, compare that to their 50 trillion in derivatives, and it might not seem like much money. A little, you know, whatever silver, 600 million times $16 is not a lot of money. But if you think about it this way, since JP Morgan is the largest manipulator of silver, they have the ability to turn this thing right around and stop manipulating silver, or even manipulate silver up. And if they manipulate silver up, they can even get it as high as covering their short position if they lost every single derivative bet that they ever made. And that would be a price of $83,333.
Yeah, that's where you kind of lost me on the original blog. So, because that sounds like a, you know, out of the ballpark kind of a number. But if you could kind of walk us back and talk about the fundamental assets and liabilities that you found at JP Morgan, and then readdress that topic of their
Sure.
of their derivative book exposure and and what we do know about their holdings of physical silver. And I have a few more questions for you about that when we get there.
No problem. JP Morgan, I mean, just looking at the base. Now, what I'm talking about is the theoretical, hypothetical that probably could never happen because other banks would go down, and you can't only have one bank left standing with all the wealth of the world. It wouldn't be allowed. So it is theoretical, but JP Morgan could be the very last bank standing. And since I have to keep my $400 or $500 in some bank so I can pay bills every month, I'm going to keep it at JP Morgan. Now, JP Morgan's balance sheet, they got $620 billion in cash and light cash assets. They have receivables of $52 billion, long-term assets of $2.5 trillion, liabilities of $2.2 trillion, and then stock equity of $2.5 trillion. The big thing that they have is a $48 trillion derivative position. Now, I'm not saying that JP Morgan will lose every single derivative that they ever wrote, and most of these derivatives cancel each other out through hedges. But hedges are only good if the other side stays in business. And that's the big problem with derivatives. If you have a counterparty risk, if you have a large counterparty going down, it kind of starts knocking the dominoes over, and there's no way to stop it. So I took the total outstanding liabilities and potential liabilities. So liabilities is $2.2 trillion. The derivative potential is $48 trillion, which gives you about $50 trillion in potential liabilities. And I divided that by the 600 million ounces of physical silver that they hold in their vault. And that's how I came up with, if JP Morgan put the price of silver at $83,333, that would cover their potential losses. So, I mean, obviously it's a stretch. Obviously they never have to do that because a lot of these derivatives are offsetting. But it is literally a get out of jail free card for JP Morgan because they can rig the price that high. Silver price, no one knows what it should be. It's been rigged for over 150 years. So it's kind of hard to say, that $83,000 is just way out of the park when nobody knows what the real fair market value of silver is these days.
Yeah, that's where I wanted to jump back in. If we've had recently Bill Murphy from GATA.org, the Gold Antitrust Action Committee, on talking about how the paper selling and overselling and rehypothecation of physical silver enables those who can do this basically naked short selling to drive the price to any level they want. And you've certainly mentioned that in the past. But could you talk about how, if JP Morgan has been roundly criticized by silver stackers for the past half a decade here for mercilessly driving down the price of precious metals, resisting any interfering any time that there looked like there was going to be some kind of a momentum breakout or breakout past a key threshold level. We've had David Morgan on recently talking about those key threshold levels, etc. But in their ability to drive down the price through seemingly a limitless amount of being able to sell paper silver, can you talk to us about how they can do that, and have they, in your opinion, been not only driving down the price through paper selling, but at the same time accumulating this physical, or were those two activities not done in concert? Isn't that a classic bash and stash where you are? Okay, you can basically fix the price of the thing you want to buy.
Yep, that's exactly what it is. And because JP Morgan found out probably right after they took over the Bear Stearns short position in silver, the monster short position that they had to take over, that the government said we'd back you, I think, for $10 billion on that. But they found out about the key of the silver market and what was really going on, and Blythe Masters was put in charge of it. She's the woman who invented the credit default swap. She didn't invent it, but she is definitely the one who promoted it the most in the beginning and got JP Morgan knee deep in that, and then got them out right in time before the crash of that market. But she was then she's the queen of derivatives, basically. She's run all the derivative contracts, and she's basically in charge of anything derivative related in the world because she understands it so well, and she knows the power of unbacked fiat money and derivatives attached to that. So she took over that position at JP Morgan she took her derivative skill over to the commodities markets, and then ran her derivative game out of there, rigging the gold market, the power market, all the other markets. She even got busted for rigging the energy market. But, when you're JP Morgan and you're at the behest of, you're doing a lot of it at the behest of the Federal Reserve and the Treasury Department, they're trying to keep this game going for as long as possible. You can get away with anything you want, really. And that's exactly what JP Morgan does. Right now, we're at somewhere around, well, the COMEX is 100 billion ounces of electronic silver get traded every year, which there hasn't even been 100 billion ounces of electronic or of physical metal mined in the history of mining. I think it's somewhere around 60 billion ounces has been mined. But for some reason, every single year, over 100 billion ounces get sold on the COMEX and bought on the COMEX. Most of these, I would say over 90%, are back and forth to the same parties, just setting the price. And that's just one market. The LBMA is 130 billion ounces a year, which is just crazy because there's only, 800, 900 million ounces mined every year. So why do you need 100, 200, 300 times the amount of electronic, supposedly hedges that go on, financial hedging of inventories and things like that? And most people don't even use them as hedges. Very few mining companies hedge their production anymore because of everything that happened in the mid 2000s with Barrick Gold losing billions on their hedges and things like that. So yeah, it is a game. It is sanctioned by the U.S. government, and I go back to the very if you read the Road to Ruta theory in the work I've done, it goes back to the very first computer programs invented by Alan Greenspan in the 1960s. The very first computer-related assets. You look at today, and everything's a computer asset. Every stock, every bond, everything's computer-related. It's all been digitized. And Alan Greenspan was the guy who invented that back in the 1960s. That's what Ruta is, Root A. It's the very basis of the financial system programming of electronic assets.
Now, taking the flip side of that, I said we'd get back to that astronomical price that you would calculate out per silver. By the same token, if there's really no rule of law or no physical constraints on JP Morgan's ability to drive down the price of silver through paper selling back and forth from right hand to left hand and back and forth, are you stating that they could use a similar tactic to drive it up to a different price that they wanted it to be?
Oh, yeah. Well, it wouldn't be a similar tactic. I think to drive it down, it takes some coordination, and there's only so far you can go down before people start raising their hands and, hey, silver's below $10, but I can't buy any physical silver. There's no physical silver below. I can't, nobody's selling at $10. There's nobody has any inventory. And we've seen this happen before. And then things mellow out and they find some inventory and everybody says, all the people who had lost their shirt in the shorting of, or in their long positions, leave the market, and then the game continues. So on the downside, the only limitation is the availability of physical silver, but that doesn't change the price. They can set the price to zero and have no physical silver available to purchase. And obviously that's extreme, but it can be done with a computer and a mouse because there is no limit to the amount of silver derivatives you can sell. Obviously, people won't believe in the market anymore. And those who say, well, no, then you could just go buy physical somewhere else. There is no other markets except in silver, except the derivative markets. The COMEX is 100% derivatives with a slight component of delivery, but that can be put on hold with the financial settlement according to the rules. And also the LBMA is not even an exchange. It's an association. And they claim to be a physical market, but it is impossible for 130 billion ounces of physical silver to trade every year, trade hands. It's physically impossible. How many truckloads of silver is that? So yeah, there is no other place in the world where the price of silver, physical silver, is set. In Shanghai, they were thinking about it. They started a gold exchange, but they couldn't do it with silver because they couldn't find the physical. They have I think it's a Hong Kong silver derivative market, but not a physical market. So it's really interesting how the world has somehow gotten into a position where there is no other way to price silver other than using silver derivatives.
Now, in contrast to that, what about the actual physical market? When people who want to obtain either at the retail level or industrial investors, that sort of thing, want to take delivery on physical metal, there is actually a price at which you have to pay up in order to take, if you really want physical metal. That's the physical market. So how do you see that physical market being affected by, in other words, here's a nutshell of what I'm taking from you is you're saying, I hate what the banks are doing, but I need banking in my life to be able to transact and carry on life in a modern world. Therefore, I'll pick the one that's the best positioned to weather a collapse. And could you just take us through what you think is a realistic post-collapse position by JP Morgan? What are their realistic options? You mentioned that perhaps their assets could wither.
Yeah, realistically, I don't think any bank will survive. Most likely, because JP Morgan has dealings with a lot of other people as well. If JP Morgan came up and said, well, everything else, everybody lost their checking and savings. That's the other thing. When these banks start to fail, people run in and pull their checking savings, try to get it out of the bank. So you have runs on banks and things like that. Can JP Morgan survive that? Yes, they can, but there will be no physical market for silver. That's the other thing. There'll be no LBMA. There'll be no COMEX. If every other bank goes down, see, that's the ultimate flaw in my argument is it can never really get to that point where JP Morgan sticks the price at $83,000 an ounce of silver and the rest of the system keeps on functioning. It wouldn't function. Every single bank would go down because they are all derivative players too, either directly or indirectly. And so, yeah, it's a big problem. JP Morgan has the ability. I don't think I'd ever see my money again from JP Morgan. But if I have to pick one bank out of all of them, I would pick the bank with this monster silver long position in real silver. And they have a short position in silver, but I have a feeling they can get out of it pretty easily, just driving the price down to like $10, making everybody freak out and dump all their silver positions, and then JP Morgan just sit there and let the price run. And it doesn't take rigging to make the price go up. All it takes is the lack of price suppression because it's such a coiled spring ready to explode. If JP Morgan and the official silver rigging ended, you'd see a moonshot that nobody knows where it would end.
If we could turn our attention to Bitcoin, there has been talk ever since we attended the Liberty Mastermind Symposium about whether or not Bitcoin actually represents money, whether it can be used and whether it's wise for people to diversify into that. It seems that after some bumpy starts, it's really been on a tear recently as opposed to gold and silver specifically. Can you talk to us about what you think is going on with Bitcoin versus gold and silver and what you think some of the main considerations are that people should look at when considering taking any position in Bitcoin?
Yeah, sure. I mean, if we're comparing gold and silver to Bitcoin, gold and silver have a monster derivative book that is traded. It's not really a physical game. So, and Bitcoin does not really. There are some derivatives on Bitcoin, but not many. The problems with Bitcoin lie in the exchanges. The exchanges, those are the large. I think there's over 30 exchanges, but the larger ones like Kraken and Coinbase and Huobi and all those are really being cleaned up. China has cleaned up the Chinese exchanges such that the volume now is actually reasonable. They were trading millions of coins a day, which was ridiculous because only 16 million coins have ever been mined. So people put money and Bitcoin into these exchanges for trading, but none of those trading trades actually get put on the blockchain. That's all within the exchanges. And I think the only exchanges that are doing that still are in Japan because the volumes are through the roof. And that's where Mt. Gox was, if you remember that.
Yeah.
So there is a potential for another crash/pullback of Bitcoin. But it's not Bitcoin's fault. It's the people who are rigging the Bitcoin markets and rigging it through both the destruction of companies. Like Mt. Gox was not a hack of 600,000 Bitcoin. It was people were trying to withdraw their Bitcoin, and Mt. Gox didn't have it. They didn't have the Bitcoin that they claimed to have in their trading. So a lot was learned by that, and Bitcoin itself just gets stronger and stronger every day. Every time there's a problem with Bitcoin, it's fixed, and it's what Cliff High calls anti-fragile, meaning that every time it breaks, they fix the problem, and that problem is no longer there, and it is fixed forever. So, yeah, Bitcoin is an amazing technology. It will continue to rise into the tens of thousands, even hundreds of thousands, maybe even millions of dollars per Bitcoin as the old system goes away and we look for a new system. I think silver and gold will also be reintroduced to people as a form of money when the manipulation ends, or when the manipulation is beaten down. But that's not until the U.S. is ready, because the U.S. controls the computer programs. So, it's a great time to be in Bitcoin. And I know a lot of people have made a lot of money in Bitcoin and are starting to diversify by selling some Bitcoin and buying silver at these low prices.
We had Rob Kirby on, and he was talking about the irony that gold and silver, arguably the most real and sound money, the true physical money that has ever been existent in history. And David Morgan says the vote of history is in, and gold and silver are money, according to history, that they have been trading completely decoupled from natural price discovery and completely decoupled from normal supply and demand price action over the past several years, and you say maybe decades. Whereas, in contrast to that, Bitcoin, which is arguably entirely virtual, has no physicality whatsoever to it, is trading like a real honest market where supply and demand actually apply. Just the irony of that was something that really stuck out in Rob Kirby's analysis.
Well, I tend to disagree, because I do have physical Bitcoin. I have a physical paper wallet in my pocket that is loaded with 1 Bitcoin. So I would call that a physical asset. And it does take some thinking, but so does gold and silver. Gold and silver took people to think about it first before it ever became money. It probably took hundreds of years before it became money. So historically, yeah, gold and silver have a history as money. Bitcoin, on the other hand, actually has only been around since 2009. I would say it's got a 100% track record right now as money. It's never been abandoned as money. People have used it as money since the very first pizza was bought with Bitcoin. So you could argue that Bitcoin is more successful as money than gold, which has been cast away dozens, if not hundreds of times in history. Not completely cast away, but definitely cast away by governments going off the gold standard and onto something else and then returning to a gold standard. So the next time we have a crash in the monetary system, there's going to be gold as usual. It's potential. There's going to be silver, although I don't think there's a lot of physical silver to use as money. And there's going to be Bitcoin this time, because it's just a new invention. It's an amazing invention. And the best thing about Bitcoin is that it is very scarce. It's got a specific limited quantity of 21 million, whereas gold and silver, you can always find another gold mine in the ground, under the ocean, on an asteroid, on another planet. So I can give you many arguments why Bitcoin's even better than gold and silver. But I like them all. Clearly, the governments are very afraid of gold and silver, and not as much afraid as Bitcoin, because they haven't really passed many laws banning Bitcoin. I think any country that would pass a law is just kicking their citizens in the heel, because having Bitcoin as an alternative when the banks crash is going to be very important.
Well, Bix, you certainly give us lots of things to think about here, both about joining the bankster empire and also about the arbitrary power of almost unlimited downside and upside pricing, and also the derivatives exposure of multiple banks to each other, even those that may be too big to fail, supposedly, and about the reality of Bitcoin in the face of what other people might say being entirely virtual. So if people want to get out more of your work and more of your thinking, where will they find you?
Go to my website, roadtoruta.com, and put your email in, and you'll get free emails and also get a free book called Silver, Gold, Bitcoin, and God.
Well, Bix Weir, founder of roadtoruta.com, just thank you so much for joining us again here on Reluctant Preppers.
Thank you, Duncan.